can't get out of my bed. There's a thought crime running through my head. Can't take these rules, and people are fools who believe what they read and believe what they see, believe what they see on the TV. Opinions are like iPhones.
Hello and welcome to episode 19 of Glass Onion on John Lennon. This is in fact the second episode 19, which I'll explain in a second. So it's Saturday, September the 14th. Happy birthday to my sister Marina, who's 104 today. She's not even close to that. She's not even 50 in fact, and very young at heart. So yeah, I hope you have a good day, Marina, if you're listening. So, well, it's also welcome back to the West for me. I went to India, came back a couple of weeks ago. Very difficult really to sum up the trip. A couple of sound bites here. I might well write something about it, or might even podcast about it, try and link it to John Lennon somehow. I didn't actually make it to Rishikesh in the end, by the way. I was planning to, but it was monsoon season over there, and really the weather dictated a lot of where I went. My plans changed multiple times. Ended up going to Delhi and then 2 or 3 places in Rajasthan, which is sort of to the west of Delhi. I went to Jaipur, Pushkar and Udaipur, and then I went to Varanasi. I suppose really the takeaway, I mean it's the oldest cliche in the book, but cliches are not necessarily inaccurate. Just to appreciate what you've got, because there's a lot of middle class people in India, there's a lot of rich people in India, but it is predominantly poor, and some of the poverty I saw and some of the lives I saw really did bring it home to me that I've got really zero to complain about, which is not to say that I think people in the West should feel guilty or that they should never have anything to grumble about, because life is life, and it's different types of struggle. But really when you do see abject poverty of the sort that I saw, you really sort of owe it to yourself really to take the opportunity that you've got to live in relative comfort. To use another cliche or something from a book, people want to win the lottery. If you're middle class and you live in the West and you have some skills, you've more or less already won the lottery, because you're in such a small minority of the wealthiest and most prosperous people in the world. Anyway, perhaps more on that. We'll see how that goes. The other thing I want to say actually is that since I've been back, I've read Jude Sutherland Kessler's, I think it's 4th or 5th book. It's her latest book anyway in the John Lennon series. And I did interview Jude. Some of you may have heard that back in, I think it was in the spring, April maybe. And I was kidding her about the fact that her book was not only 780 pages, but it had over 3,000 footnotes. Well, I tackled the whole lot. I mean, some of the footnotes obviously are just the names of books, the sources. But there are quite a few notes as well. And I knocked it off in about, I think it was 12 days. I catalogue these things, sadly enough. She's not just to congratulate myself. That wasn't the reason I said that. It was just to say that it was a kind of a frenzy of reading, because I got very much into it. And it was so very appropriate, because the latest one is about 1964. And Jude and I talked about that year in John Lennon and the Beatles' life. Breathless was the word that I came up with. And Jude's book really brings that home. And also how miserable really John Lennon was, and how tired of the Beatles thing him and George in particular were. Paul and Ringo perhaps not so much, or even nothing like as much. I think they were still genuinely enjoying it. But we always think of basically the Beatles sort of hit big in England in, let's say, between August and October. I would say October, the London Palladium show, was where the term Beatlemania was coined. And then their life in America was basically February 64, which was the Ed Sullivan show, or perhaps just prior to that when Wanna Hold Your Hand hit number 1, up to August 66. Obviously Candlestick Park was the last concert, August 29th, 1966. And the general sort of perception that I had, even having read a lot of stuff about the Beatles, maybe other people had, is that they kind of enjoyed it in 64. They were buzzing. 65, one of the first shows was obviously Shea Stadium, which was, still going forwards and upwards, whatever the word is. still experiencing new things and still buzzing off that. But 65 became a bit of a drag. 66 was kind of a drag the whole time, notwithstanding the Bigger Than Jesus and the Philippines controversy. But just talking about America, first of all, because I would say the stuff that hit home in Jude's book was really the North American tour, which is obviously a crazy schedule, 30-odd days, basically 30-odd cities, and sometimes a couple of gigs in the same city on the same day. And really what came from the book was that, like I say, John and George in particular were pretty much fed up of it by, in England, perhaps May, June, and in America, this August, September tour, which is not to say that they didn't enjoy parts of it. And obviously, there were carnal pleasures and herbal pleasures, courtesy of Bob Dylan, and there was drinks and very nice food and everything laid on for them. They probably enjoyed bits of it. But really, they were pretty fed up, and the workload, I knew about the workload, but really you have to read this book to really understand when it goes day by day, and you just find that they really don't get any peace. And, poor old Derek Taylor and Neil and Mal as well, Neil I'd say more, Mal seemed to do more of the kind of heavy lifting, but Derek and Neil, let's say, have to keep sort of waking them up and say, oh, sorry, boys, but, can you do 10 minutes? Can you do a couple of photos outside the plane, even though it's 3 a.m? And can you do this press conference? And then, the press conferences, when they're tired and they're cranky, and these reporters occasionally get an imaginative question. And there were a couple of embedded reporters that they were happy to talk to. Larry Kane, obviously, John in particular, had a very good rapport with. But they're tired, and then they just get this, what will you do when the bubble bursts? How often do you wash your hair? Do you worry? And even stuff like something along the lines of, do you worry about your hair or something? Does it get in the way? Or just, the most inane crap you can imagine. You're like, come on. I know that sections of the fans want to know this kind of frivolous stuff, but there are also intelligent people who would like to hear them asked about, important things. Having said that, of course, I was interested to see how sort of offhand the remarks were that John made about politics and religion. Obviously, he had been briefed by Epi to stay away from those, and I think 65 and 66 he started to talk about them and sort of refused to stay silent like a good boy. And John kind of says, we're not interested in politics, which clearly wasn't true because he read the papers voraciously. So that was interesting. The other thing is that, again, we read a lot about and hear a lot about the frenzy and the screaming fans, but again, it really brings it home that, these are people that the Beatles cannot possibly relate to, apart from occasional fans. I think one-on-one, probably the Beatles are related to a few of them in other more intimate ways, but that's another story. But sometimes you get like a fan on their own might say something quite sweet, or to say, I genuinely appreciate. But when you've got this mob, and honestly there's thousands of them, and the way they come across in this book, it's just this sort of frenzied, almost like zombies. In the terms of the mindlessness, obviously they're not slow and silent like zombies. Try and imagine screaming zombies moving a lot quicker. If you watch any of George A. Romero's zombie movies, which do actually have a social message. I mean, the second one in the series was Dawn of the Dead, and it's set in a shopping centre, and it's just it's zombies just walking around robotically, picking up products and looking at them. Where have we seen that before? But this mob becomes something that the Beatles cannot identify with, and you can't reason with them as a mob because they're just knocking down barricades and they're chucking stuff. One of the famous stories, which sort of sounds quite comedic, is someone throwing a raw steak. I can't remember if it hit Paul or George. I think it was one of those two. And other stuff, and it went on from, jelly beans. There is a distinction, by the way, between jelly babies in England, which are quite soft, and jelly beans, which are in America. I don't know if they still exist the same now, but they were much harder, And I think Jude told me when we did our interview that I think it was Paul nearly got hit in the eye. Could have, it sounds ridiculous to say, could have been blinded or, could have had some sort of damage. But, it got really serious. But, like I say, the takeaway from this book is really that when they got back from the tour, I was amazed they went back twice more, Anyway, so I should go on to today's episode. So what I've done is I did originally post this interview uncut on it was the 30th of July, because I was literally about 4 hours from going to the airport to go to India. So in a minute I'm going to cut to me back in July, just talking about David Bedford and introducing the interview with him. So what I've done is I've edited, as I wasn't able to then. I've done a part 1, and then there'll be a part 2. So they're in sort of more manageable chunks, because originally it was just a 2-hour file with no edits at all. So I'm going to cut to me back in July, and I'll see you at the end for a few words. And I think I say that as well in July. So you get that twice. Anyway, so this is a talk I did with David Bedford in Liverpool. And we did it at the Jacaranda, which has a very important part in Beatles history. David was a lovely guy. As you'll hear, we pretty much bantering from the word go. And, as all the other people I've talked to, Jude, Ken McNabb, David Thurmeyer, Dan Richter, they've all been great, very generous with their time. So David and I basically talked about nearly all stuff that was pre-fame. And as you'll hear, I just cherry-picked a few things. Of course, the big thing is trying to find a different angle or trying to find something different to ask him. But he was happy to give some answers from his book. And of course, I did want to promote all his books. You'll see, if you're looking on SoundCloud here, you'll see the picture. Finding the Fourth Beatle is his most recent book. So again, couldn't recommend that enough. So let's get straight to it. I have a few brief words on the other side. So see you then. Enjoy. Hello, welcome to Glass Onion on John Lennon, episode something. I'm not sure what episode it is. Do you know why? Because I've just interviewed Ken McNabb, who's just written a book called And in the End, massively recommended. And we've already done 2.5 hours. His book goes from January to December.
Yep.
And we've done 2.5 hours, and we just got to the end of October. So I don't know if that's going to be 2 parts or 3 parts. Anyway, I'm here in Liverpool with David Bedford. My mum thought I was going to be interviewing the long-distance runner with a moustache.
Oh.
Yes.
Tell me about it. I thought I got through it all my whole life.
Yes.
People were saying, David Bedford, oh, you the runner. No.
Don't punch me, please.
And I was okay. But the good thing was, that also quietened down a bit.
Good.
Then the 118 advert started.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, please, not again.
Well, those adverts are bad enough.
Exactly.
Just the adverts.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're here in Liverpool. It's, what day is it today? Wednesday.
Thursday.
Oh, hey, good start. Is it Thursday?
Can I just ask you, what's your name?
Yeah. Can you just see the professionalism oozing from me now? Thursday, the 18th.
I'd go with it. Yeah, 18th. I'll give you that one.
All right, let's rewind so I sound really good and professional. So we're in Liverpool. It's Thursday, the 18th of July, and I'm here with David Bedford, and we are in the Jacaranda. Don't even need to tell Beatles fans all about the Jacaranda. It's a nice day today. We were talking about the weather earlier. So David, I've been listening to podcasts you've done. I've watched your videos, and the hardest thing is to try and find something you haven't been asked before. And I'm not sure if I'm not sure if I'm going to achieve that, but we're trying to find some new angles. And
okay.
I am a bit of a psychology buff, and my podcast is trying to look at maybe the psychology of John Lennon a bit. So
okay.
I might have a few questions about that.
I might analyse you at the end.
Oh, go on then. Yeah, why not? Why not? Are you Liverpool born and bred, first of all?
Yeah, I'm from the Dingle.
I'm from Dingle.
So literally the bottom of Madryn Street where Ringo was born. My house was down there.
Oh, right.
So I went to the school that Ringo went to, St Silas.
But you're a lot younger.
Thank you very much.
I remember you saying...
somebody did once say, you were at school with Ringo.
Yeah.
25 years older than me. He's healthier than me, I'll give him that. Yeah. But he's 25 years older.
And he doesn't have a single grey hair. Which is,
no, exactly.
It's a miracle.
It's all natural.
Yeah. While we're in the Jacaranda, what I'm actually going to do, I'm going to sort of cherry pick a few things, because I've become more and more fascinated by the pre-fame years. I think for various reasons, obviously because they're not so well documented.
Yeah.
And one of the things that made me fall in love with it was Mike McCartney's book, Remember.
Yes.
Those incredible black and white photos are just fantastic.
Yeah.
The earthiness of the Beatles really comes through in that.
It's the Liverpool, and that's the bit that a lot of people don't get.
Yeah.
Is they could only have come from Liverpool, no other city.
Yeah. I mean, can you tell us, where does the personality of Liverpool come from? What are the elements?
Good question.
Hey, I got you.
No, that's fine. It's one of my favourite topics.
All right.
I'm a big fan of Liverpool history and very, very proud
I'm
of the city.
I'm a bit of a history buff as well,
yeah.
So let's go there to start
right.
with.
So, if you think Ken McNabb can talk for ages, I'm going to start in 1207 and take you year by year through the history. No.
January the 1st, 1207.
It was August, actually.
All right, okay.
And that's when we officially became a town.
Okay.
In 1207, King John gave us the royal seal. Not much happened here. It was still a small fishing village, little town for a few hundred years. What really made Liverpool was obviously our location, west coast of Britain, big port. So transatlantic trade eventually became very, very important to us. But as a port city, everybody was coming in, all nations, all over the place. So we became very, very cosmopolitan. I noticed this first time I went to New York. New York to me is like Liverpool just on steroids.
Yeah.
Everything's just so much bigger.
Well, John said that, didn't he? When
Exactly.
he moved?
That's why he felt at home there. It's so similar. So we've got this cosmopolitan mix of people. We've got the oldest Chinese community in Europe established here. One of the largest Afro-Caribbean communities established here. One of the oldest Jewish communities. But we had Little Italy. We had the German Quarter. So all these different nationalities coming in. Now most of the money for Liverpool initially was made on the back of the slave trade. So along with Bristol and London, we were the main people involved in the slave trade. So the ships would sail down to west coast of Africa, unload the goods, load the slaves, transport them across the Atlantic, go to the Caribbean and the southern states. Then those ships would then bring back cotton and tobacco, etc. like that. So not something we're proud of, and it is something we have addressed. Liverpool was at the forefront of abolishing the slave trade. William Roscoe, it was an MP, him with William Wilberforce led for the abolition of slavery. So we've got that bit of history, but that made Liverpool into a huge international port, and we were one of the most important commercial ports in the whole world, in the old British Empire. Again, let's start apologising for that one, because some bits were useful and helpful, but So we were the second port of the British Empire, second only to London, which is exponentially bigger than Liverpool. But the trade was coming into here. So we became sort of the centre for the world trade in cotton and tobacco and sugar. One of the biggest, I think, cultural influences, and this is where we look forward to what influenced the Beatles, was the Irish potato famine of the 1840s. In that decade, over 1 million Irish people passed through Liverpool, and about 100,000 stayed. Now our population at the time was only about 200,000. So to suddenly get 100,000 people in a decade was not a great idea. You had families living in one room, conditions were very, very poor, it was not great. But that Irish influence really affected the culture of the city. So it's recognised in the accent, there's a lot of Irish in that. But that idea of the large families, the musical families, and that's very much part of, particularly like the McCartney family, because it's both the Lennons and the McCartneys came over in that decade. So they affected the culture. So you've got a mixture of all these different nationalities, all these big influences, the British and foreign, the different cultural influences, and then America became a massive part of the Liverpool culture. Initially in the 1860s, not popularly, because the American Civil War, Liverpool got heavily involved in that. The Confederate Navy was largely built in Liverpool.
Oh, is that right?
Oh, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so there was, they do said if it wasn't for Liverpool's involvement, the American Civil War would probably only have lasted 12 months, not over 4 years that it did.
Wow.
And the very final act of the Civil War was when the captain of the Shenandoah sailed his ship into the Mersey, and he surrendered at Liverpool Town Hall.
Oh, wow.
So there's a lot in there, but I'm just about finishing the book on that, because there is so much information.
Right.
It's a fascinating topic.
Yeah.
So there was that not so popular bit of American culture.
Yeah.
But we were so important to America that when they secured independence after the Independence War, the first city outside of America to get a consulate was Liverpool. Ironically, James Mowry, where he lived, was later a private nursing home where Brian Epstein was born.
Oh, wow.
It's all these connections.
Oh, my God.
Yeah. So we had this close tie with America. There were ships going between Liverpool and New York from the 1840s. So this was the main place for like the Cunard and White Star Line to be going backwards and forwards. So that again brings in more culture. And what you find in the 20th century through the First and the Second World War, our position was perfect for the American troops to be coming over to join the war.
I was going to ask you, do you think like Liverpool was quite progressive in terms of, I don't like this term, but racial tolerance? I mean, we probably wouldn't use this term now, but
well, do you know
do
what?
you think...
That's a very, very good point, because in the Second World War, there was an air base outside Liverpool called Burton Wood, and because America was segregated, the air base was segregated. So there were still American troops there. I think we finished going to the early 1980s. But certainly when we get around the sort of the 1960, at that time, when the servicemen were coming into Liverpool to let their hair down, I think they initially thought it'd be a good idea to let them go together, but that ended to be more fights.
Right.
So these were the white guys came into the city centre, places like the Jacaranda. The black guys would go to the Afro-Caribbean clubs in the Liverpool 8 area. They would bring their records with them, and they would be playing songs that aren't released already in the UK. And we know that John, Paul and George were hanging out in some of those clubs because Lord Woodbine, who was Alan Williams' business partner, he introduced them to this whole different music scene. So they're getting all this American music coming into this city, unlike any other city in Britain. So you've got that, the American culture. I mean, all the lads were obsessed with the cowboy films. Everything American, that's what they wanted. And because there was these servicemen so close, they could get access to all this. Then we've got these people we called the Cunard Yanks. These were great. So these are the sailors who were on the Cunard and the White Star lines going to New York. And while they're waiting to get on the ship to come back, they go off and they buy the zoot suits, aftershave, cameras, and of course records. They brought all those back to Liverpool. And then if they had a member of the family who was in a band or something, then they'd say, here's some more records, go and learn them. Because every group was trying to get a record that nobody else had. So again, you've got all these different cultures coming into the city, which was completely unique over here. Another part which people don't realise is that, particularly in the 60s, Liverpool was known as the Nashville of the North, because there was a massive country western scene here. Again, biggest in Britain, possibly the biggest in Europe.
Which era are we talking about now?
So this is in the 60s. So what we found was that, I mean, if you look at the very first business cards that Nigel Wally had made for the Quarrymen, on the music there it says country, western, skiffle, rock and roll.
That's right.
Because what they realised was, once you learn your 3 chords to play your Lonnie Donegan skiffle stuff, those same 3 chords played country and played rock and roll. And so bands would then decide which route to go down. Some would go down the beat music route, others went down the country route. So Liverpool has always had this big country music scene as well.
Yeah, and of course, I mean, Beatles for Sale is a pretty country album, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I mean, you're a guitarist and I'm a guitarist, and for any guitarist listening, and we're definitely fans of that alternate bass, the alternate bass picking and everything. There's a lot of country music in Beatles songs.
Well, there is exactly, because George picked up, he loved like the Chet Atkins style. He loved all that. And you can hear that all the way through. So it's not just one style of music. Everything was here, you know, jazz was here and was really big. So you got your country music, skiffle took off. Everything was happening all at the same time. And it was a case of, well, think of what your influences are. And you can see that, like with Paul in particular, he'd be thinking more of, he liked the music hall and the variety.
Yeah.
You can see that more of like When I'm 64, that type of thing. John, as we know, was a rock and roller at heart. That's all he wanted. He loved his rock and roll. But he was a big country music fan. Hank Williams in particular, he was a big fan of Hank Williams. Okay. So they were all listening to so many different styles of music. So it's very hard to pigeonhole them. Yeah. They're not a rock and roll band, because they're a really good R&B band. And you know, if you talk to a lot of Americans, I think, well, the stars they've been influenced by over here, like with Chuck Berry and Little Richard, weren't as popular necessarily back home in the States. You know, when they still had the race charts, and you'd have people like Pat Boone would re-record Tutti Frutti, so the lyrics were a bit nicer.
Oh yeah. I've heard those.
Yeah. Over here they didn't do the Pat Boone versions, I can assure you. So they had all these stars, and then when you get, you know, Bill Haley played in Liverpool, and the big one for John was Buddy Holly and the Crickets, playing in Liverpool 20th of March 1958.
Yeah, but is it right they didn't go to that though? Pray tell.
Yeah.
Go on.
I spoke to Nigel Wally, John's friend, and John and Nigel went.
Okay.
Because I'd always wondered why he wouldn't have gone, because so many other Liverpool musicians went. But Nigel said no, he and John went. So it's just one of the greatest nights of their lives. John never talks about it, and I don't know why. But Nigel said it was an absolutely brilliant night, and he loved it.
Yeah. Do you like Buddy Holly?
Oh yeah.
I just think he's amazing.
Fantastic. He was a huge influence on the Liverpool music scene.
Yeah.
You know, and we were having this little chat before about wearing glasses, and of course that's what gave John the confidence to stick his glasses on.
Yeah.
Because when you've got Elvis Presley looking like he did, like nobody else had ever seen anything like that before.
Yeah, it's like an alien, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's like from another planet or something. Yeah, yeah.
And then you look at Buddy Holly, nothing about him says popular music star.
Well, he was geeky, wasn't he?
Exactly.
Basically looked like a geek.
Yeah. But he looked good, and he made it look good, and he sounded brilliant. The songs were superb. So you can see John's influence by Buddy Holly, even just wearing the glasses and seeing where he's going. But everything all the way through the Beatles, if you look at their songs, you look at those influences, and you can see it all the way through, all these big stars.
Absolutely, yeah.
They loved them all, so probably I'd say Liverpool has looked more across the ocean to the Atlantic than it has down south to London.
So you kind of your horizons already broadened from a young age, yeah.
Yeah. So you grow up with all this culture. So there's the simple answer to your question.
Yeah, there we go. All right, one more question. I'm kidding. So we're in the Jacaranda, so I must talk about Alan Williams.
Yeah.
Now, the first time I ever heard of Alan Williams, do you remember TVAM?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so people who don't know, breakfast TV started in the 80s, and there was a BBC and an ITV, and I think
Morning,
Parky,
Britain.
Yeah, Parky was on the ITV one, I remember.
Yeah.
Anyway, they had like a Beatles special. I think it was when Help and Magical Mystery Tour were first brought out on VHS, which would have been, I think it was 88, something like that.
Yeah.
'Cause I think actually one of the interviews has ended up on YouTube. Anyway, Alan Williams is on there, and he'd just become president of the Russian Beatles fan club, or something like that. And it was brilliant. He was drinking coffee from a mug which said the mug that gave the Beatles away. And I thought, oh, this guy's a bit of a character. And he appeared on Complete Beatles. And I mean, obviously he's appeared on most of those documentaries. I think from reading Tune In, I think Alan Williams, there's been almost a resurgence in terms of his importance. So could you tell me what kind of importance do you think he has? Where do you fall on that?
Alan was a great guy.
Right.
Met him a number of times. In fact, I was with him about 3 or 4 weeks before he died. And I'm actually glad, because the conversation that we had, his memory was starting to go. He repeated himself a few times, but on the whole, he still looked great, in his 80s. So we just started reminiscing the Hamburg days and stuff. And I said to him, Alan, you do realise that if you hadn't done what you did in 1960, you got them a drummer, you gave them somewhere to play, you got them to Hamburg. Yeah. If you hadn't have done that, there would be no Beatles. He went, I hadn't really thought of it like that. I said, well, you should, because you deserve that credit. And I'm so glad I said that to him, because that was the last time I saw him. And when I was doing the research for my first book, Liverpool, all those years ago, I got his book, The Man Who Gave the Beatles Away.
Yeah.
But he was around Liverpool, so I just got in touch and said, if you do an interview. So we went off to the Grapes in Matthew Street, and we talked for an hour and a half, something like that. And he's great fun, and he's a good storyteller. But what I found was that because of that book, people then decided to write him off as irrelevant, because there wasn't enough genuine stories in there. The journalist who's writing it with him started making stories up, so people dismiss everything about him. And so I'm very much on Team Williams.
In fairness, I think his personality, maybe because he came across as a salesman.
Yes.
I think he didn't do himself any favours.
Agree.
Just from my vantage point. But
Yeah. No, I agree with you. And he was looking to make a quick buck here, there, and everywhere. I think maybe he felt that he should have earned his money off the Beatles, and he didn't. But for me, I go back to what I said to him. At the beginning of 1960, and there's this show at the Liverpool Stadium. Gene Vincent's on there, the Liverpool bands are on there, John, Paul, George and Stuart are in the audience. And they say to Alan, why can't you do that for us? And he said, well, I didn't realise you had a group. And they didn't really. So, we're here.
3 guitars and no drummer, more or less.
It was 3 guitars and a bass. That was it.
Oh, I had a bass. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, because Stuart had just joined.
By then,
But they had no drummer. So he said, well, we'll get you a drummer. And then, effectively, Alan then becomes their manager. So he gets on Tommy Moore as the first drummer. Then Tommy quits, doesn't get on very well with John.
Scotland tour.
Yeah. And then, looking out the window as we are now, right across the road is the artist shop on Jackson and Sons. And that...
Mr. Kebab, you mean?
No, right next to it.
Ah, sorry, right.
See?
Oh, it's still the same, is it?
It's still the same.
Oh, okay.
That's where Norman Chapman worked.
Ah, yes, I was just reading about that.
Yeah. So Alan was standing outside in Slater Street with the other lads, and they could just hear somebody playing drums, and it was Norman. So he came and joined the group.
I've just been reading it. I just want to do a quick plug for a book that I'm nothing to do with, but I just read it called All Roads Lead to Lennon by a fellow called Philip Kirkland. And I was just reading about that. It's amazing, quite a story.
Well, I found when I was doing my second book, The Fab 104, there's never been a photo of Norman published anywhere. And I heard hardly any information on him. I managed to track down his daughter, so I actually got a proper biography, and the only ever published photos of Norman are in my book, The Fab 104.
Because he was pretty handy, wasn't he?
He was a very good drummer. Very good drummer.
Yeah.
But then, of course, Alan gets the Hamburg gig. The week before they're due to go, Norman gets called up to do national service in the army.
Of course, because the Beatles just missed out on that, which is another massive thing, isn't it?
They still didn't know at that time, because it wasn't until the end of 1960 it was abolished. So at that time, they were in the next batch who would have been called up.
The cut-off was
1939. So because they were born in 40, they just missed it.
Yeah.
So Norman had to go off and join the army, which is when Pete Best comes into the story.
Yeah.
So all this is happening around the Jacaranda. Alan's letting them play here every week, and he's giving them the odd job to do, like painting the toilets and whatever else. And they were just lurking around, being bums, as Alan would say.
Yeah.
But because of what Alan did, he did have a good business plan for some stuff, and he got them over to Hamburg. Again, he drove them over there, lent them some money.
I mean, that's an epic journey, isn't it? It's, without too many resources, it's one of those amazing stories.
Yeah. On student visas.
Yeah.
And to negotiate at the docks to get them to take the van with all the gear on top.
And of course, that amazing photo by the War Memorial, their name liveth forever, evermore.
Yeah.
I mean, you could not make that up.
I know, it's amazing.
It's incredible.
By Alan doing what he did in 1960 and getting them to Hamburg, that's what made the Beatles.
Yeah.
It was those hundreds and hundreds of hours on stage in Hamburg, and then of course they drop him.
Do we know what the real story is now? Is it established?
Yeah, because what happened was, when they were wanting to move on to a different club, they sort of, in their minds, decided they'd negotiated the deal. So why should they pay Alan his 10% commission? Because they'd negotiated it, which I think is very unfair of them. So again, the title "The Man Who Gave the Beatles Away," he didn't really, because they dropped him.
They gave him away.
They gave him away.
Yeah.
Now, he did have a contract of sorts, and he could have pushed it, but he wouldn't have got anywhere. So I think in his sense, by not challenging them legally over the contract, he gave them away.
Yeah.
So he didn't do himself favours all the time, but absolutely crucial to the Beatles' history. If he didn't do that in 1960, and then what Mona Best does and Sam Leach does in 1961, there's no group for Brian to sign.
Yeah, absolutely. Alan came up with a great line, this interview I was talking about earlier.
Yeah.
He said that when again, I don't know if it's true or not, but he said when I left them, he said, "You'll never fucking work again."
Yeah.
And he said, and in the end, I was the one that never worked again.
Exactly. Which is typical him.
He definitely had a great line, didn't he?
Yeah, he was a good guy.
All right. What we're going to do, to avoid just asking you the same questions that you've been asked so many times, I'm going to cherry pick a few things that have always puzzled me.
Okay.
I need some answers.
Okay.
So we know that July the 6th, 1957, John meets Paul.
Yep.
They may have met at a newsagent called ABBA. Possibly. Maybe. All right. Now, what's puzzled me about this tape, and I was talking to Rod Davis, and he couldn't enlighten me totally. There's a slow version of Putting on the Style and a fast version of Putting on the Style. Mm-hmm. Can we establish, first of all, was Colin Hanton played that gig? Is that
Yes.
right? In the evening, yeah.
Yep.
Why would they do a slow version and a fast version of Putting on the Style? Any idea? Because you know what I mean? There's a sort of very fast, drum-heavy one.
Yeah. I think it's two separate songs which have merged into each other. I only see it because I'm sure they did. It's the Bob Molyneux tape, isn't it?
Yeah.
Recorded in the hall.
Yeah.
I think there's a bit of Putting on the Style, but there's a bit of maybe Baby Let's Play House or something like that.
Yeah.
And I just think it's the way it's recorded. So maybe the tape had degraded a bit and slowed down and then sped up.
Yeah.
I only hear those two songs. I don't see them as two versions of.
Oh, but you heard the other. But there's three songs basically. I mean, two of them are unmistakably Putting on the Style.
Yeah.
But one's more like that, and then there's this furious, simple, drumming. Yeah, it's that's one of those ones we might never be able to work that one out. But,
no, because if those guys can't remember.
Well, exactly. Yeah. And Rod told me a great anecdote, because the time that Lennon met McCartney, Rod had gone home for his dinner, apparently.
No, Colin went home for his dinner.
Oh.
Colin wasn't there for the meeting in the hall.
Okay.
But Colin did see them meeting earlier. And I found this out when I interviewed him for Liverpool. There was a scout hut where they kept their equipment. And Colin says they were in the scout hut and he was sorting out his drums and other gear to play in the afternoon. And Ivan brought someone in to introduce him. So there was actually an earlier introduction in the afternoon. But the meeting, what became sort of the audition, happens before the evening gig.
Oh, okay.
So Collins witnessed that one. Then he went home for tea. Then when they're in the hall, Rod nipped off the toilet partway through.
Yeah.
I mean, to be fair, I said to Rod, I was very disappointed. I said because he should have been taking notes, knowing that the most important meeting in music history is happening.
Yeah.
Where were you, man?
Yeah.
Come on, you're 15, 16-year-olds. You should be taking notes.
Yeah.
Shocking.
Have you ever heard of an author called John O'Farrell? He writes history books.
Yes.
Can I recommend, if people haven't heard it, it's absolutely brilliant. I can't remember the names of them, but he did a couple of history books. And he said, considering all the people who said they were at the Cavern, the Beatles must have played to audiences of about 500,000.
Definitely.
The other thing he said, he said Paul McCartney, realising that 40 years later he'd have to pay Heather Mills off, decided I'd better join this band. I like this guy, John. He's pretty good. So, yeah, pretty funny. The other thing, the recording of That'll Be the Day, the Percy Phillips.
Yes.
You've nailed it down to July the 12th.
Yes.
Are you absolutely certain about that? And how did you come by that date?
Because there's an entry in Percy Phillips' diary. Now it only says Skiffle Group. There's no one else around it. But in some ways we know it happened just a few days before John's mum was killed. It was on the 15th.
Yeah.
So when you've got that information there, that makes it pretty certain that's when it was. So it's the diary entry of Percy Phillips which helps the most. You probably know this, but when you try and do anything to do with John's life, he's the most unreliable eyewitness to anything.
That's what I'm finding more and more with my podcast. Yeah.
Oh my
Much as I love him, he's not the most reliable.
No.
Yeah. Well, Rod said too much sex, drugs and rock and roll. That was Rod Davis's...
Was that a prescription or was that just...
No.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, yeah. And did they go back and record one after 909?
Well, we're pretty sure they did, but there's no recording
that's right.
of it, unfortunately, which would be wonderful to find.
But did it get lost, or?
I mean, it's like, in spite of all the danger, That'd Be the Day was lost for years until Duflo finds it in his attic. So I still think there's stuff out there to be discovered.
Yeah, because probably they wouldn't go and record one song. Possibly they would have recorded two.
Quite possibly, yeah. And we know that, I think Brian used to go there to Percy Phillips and ask him to record when the Beatles were on radio.
Right.
So he was going there too. And most of the groups in Liverpool, at one stage or another, recorded a demo. Billy Fury did his stuff there. Because it was the only recording studio. When we could say recording studio, it was the back room of Percy's house with one microphone hanging from the ceiling.
Of course, the other amazing parallel. There's so many coincidences. That, of course, a guy called Elvis Presley was recording at Sam Phillips's studio, which was fairly small as well.
Yeah.
Amazing. There's too many coincidences.
Yep.
When I was reading Tune In, I got the deluxe. It's the only thing I've ever read on Kindle because I'm a bit of a purist when it comes to books. I thought, okay, there's this 900-page version, there's this 1,700-page version.
Yep.
I've got to read the 1,700-page version. And I was making notes, and all these weird coincidences that he talks about. There was quite a lot of theft of musical instruments in Liverpool, and a guy called Lennon stole a guitar, and the prosecuting counsel was called McCartney, and just all kinds of stuff. And you'll probably know this, but obviously one of John Lennon's first songs was "Hello Little Girl."
Yep.
There was a song that came out in 1958 called "Hello Little Girl." Was it Lloyd Price? I'm going to say, don't know.
No.
So he obviously may have got the title, maybe inspired by the title, but that song has got the lyric, I want to hold your hand. You couldn't make that up.
And that's the whole thing, it's like with coincidences with Eleanor Rigby's gravestone being in St. Peter's Church.
Yeah.
Every songwriter is influenced by the people they listen to. They've all been quite honest over the years. We nicked this from there, we nicked that from that song.
Yeah.
We picked those words up from there. You can't help. And even, I was listening the other day, I went to see A Flock of Seagulls, and I first saw them back in 1983.
Wow.
Took my girlfriend there, the stupid woman married me. So 36 years later, we went to see them again.
Were they playing the same tunes?
They're playing all the hits. And they're down at the Cavern.
Yeah.
Brilliant it was. Yeah. I was listening again to their greatest hits, and then I listened to one of their songs and thought, oh, I've nicked that for one of my songs. Oh no. And it never occurred to me then to think, subconsciously, you're absorbing all this music. Because Paul had that when he wrote Yesterday, didn't he? He thought, this can't be original.
Can't be mine. Yeah. So I think there's one called Yesterdays, wasn't there?
I mean, it's the kind of phrase that's been used. I think he should have stuck with scrambled eggs.
Yeah, right. Well, he did. Was it Jimmy Kimmel? They did a whole version of scrambled eggs. Yeah. I was talking to coincidences when you were talking about Eddie Cochran and Gene Vincent.
Yeah.
Of course, I don't want to make light of this because obviously Eddie Cochran died, and the driver of the other car was called George Martin. And of course, there was a George Harrison who wrote for the Liverpool
Echo. Yeah, interviewed them because he covered their American tours and stuff. But when they flew in for the civic reception on the 10th of July '64, that is one of my favourite interviews. Because the Liverpool Echo's George Harrison talking to the Beatles, and they're thinking, well, who's going to bother coming to see us? We finished our last thing at the Cavern last year. Now, if it was a lad I knew from school, would I go to the bottom part of the road to see him? Said so. We'll just see who turns up. And of course, there's 200,000 people there. And I think that made more to them than anything else because they were just so downhearted. Thinking, well, yeah, a few people might turn out that day, and they were just gobsmacked by it.
Well, can I ask you, as a Liverpudlian, do you think that some Liverpudlians would feel that they betrayed them by moving to London?
I think that was that feeling, but
right.
I mean, it's still in a way that way today. But back in the 60s, once you look at it logically, if we're saying our only recording studio is the back of Percy Phillips' house with one microphone,
that was literally the only studio.
That was the only studio.
Right.
So you had to be in London for the recording studios. The A&R guys, dare they get out of Greater London, they weren't going to come up and see you. All the media was based in London. Television was based down there. BBC Radio was based down there. You had to be in London. And it's still like now that Nashville's the mecca for the country stars. Even though we've got some really good recording studios in Liverpool now, and loads of top bands have recorded here, London is still the mecca. But in the 60s, they had to be down there.
Right. Would Manchester have been an option? I mean,
Manchester is never an option for anything.
I was just going to say, is there a big rivalry?
Oh,
there is, right? Okay.
Huge.
I know the football rivalry.
That's the later part of it. It goes back to them building the Manchester Ship Canal.
Right. Okay.
We bear a grudge for that.
All right. Yeah. The other thing, this has always puzzled me. I need answers. They're 1960 recordings, Quarrymen recordings.
Yep.
Now, I'll just tell you what I've heard on YouTube. I think it's 1 hour 45 minutes, and let me just tell you what I know.
Okay.
And then you can fill in the gaps for me. Basically, there's a tape of these fairly horrendous 12-bar recordings, and I think it's almost befitting that they're that bad, because then for the Beatles to become that good, it's almost so fitting. Because honestly, I mean, they do have names because they're shouting things out. There's one called Johnny, and they're fairly horrendous. Anyway. But then there's a few gems in there, and Cayenne I've always liked.
Yes.
There's a couple that I actually wish Paul would play now. There's one called Well Darling.
Yep.
Which I think the harmonies in that, I mean, they're crude, but Well Darling, they're fantastic.
But look at In Spite of All the Danger. You listen to that. The three of them sing around that microphone. It's a very, very good song. And you can hear the harmonies between the three of them there.
I think it's George doing that.
It is.
Yeah, that's right. There's another one, Some Days, I quite like. Some days we remember, some days we forget. Anyway, have we ascertained where those were made? Do we know for sure or not?
Most of that kind of stuff was getting done in Fourth Road.
Okay.
I mean, Mimi didn't even like Paul playing his guitar in the house.
Yeah, they used to go on the porch.
So bringing in a reel-to-reel tape recorder and microphone.
No.
Oh, absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
Not having that. So that's the most likely place was recordings at Fourth Ring because Paul's dad encouraged him with his music. Plus they would pick times either his dad was out at work or was off watching the horses or something. So there's pretty good access to Fourth Ring Road.
Because it does sound, I know it's probably the equipment, but it sounds very cavernous, so I wondered whether people have said it could have been one of the rooms of the Art College or even Gambia Terrace.
The next one I was going to say is, Gambia Terrace and Percy Street as well, where Stuart and Rob Murray were before they went to Gambia. They definitely recorded stuff there.
The recordings sound cavernous.
It's a big room.
It could be just the equipment. Yeah.
It could be, but
for sure.
The rooms at Gambia Terrace and in Percy Street are the old Georgian buildings, very high ceilings, so you would get a lot of echo in
Classic
there.
Victorian, isn't it?
And so we know that they used to record stuff in both of those. I know because there was talk of, I think, John and Stuart just recording silly voices like the Goon Show and just messing around and playing. So they're the most likely ones, I think. If it wasn't Forthlin, I think in the early Quarrymen days they'd messed around with stuff like Eric's house and Colin's house, but at that kind of period. And I think the good thing about that is you have to get your head around the fact in 1960, before Hamburg, they were not particularly good. This was the first time they became an electric band. They've got a drummer coming, Tommy Moore, and they have a matter of days of practice, then they're off on their tour of Scotland.
Yeah, that's right.
Now, things interesting when you look at Johnny Gentle's recollections of that. I think a lot of people write off that tour and say it was a disaster. I don't think it was. I think it was the best thing that could have happened to them, because that prepared them for going to Hamburg, and they learned so much. And Johnny Gentle saying on the first night, half an hour before they go on, it's the first time they talk about what they're going to play. But he said by the time you the second and the third gigs, you could see the improvement in the band already. When they're heading out to Hamburg, they weren't that good, and they weren't particularly well known. They were very average.
But again, it's kind of perfect, because if it was May 1960, and maybe it's difficult to really pin that down, it's just before they got good. And Richard Buskin, of course, has a fantastic podcast. He pointed out, if you compare that to 1968 at Kinfons, when they came back from India, all the things that had happened to them in the interim, it's just incredible. I mean, we could talk about that forever. It's just a short space of time. And just
Exactly.
Astronomical.
Yep.
I was saying to Ken McNabb, someone came up with the term Beatle years, as opposed to normal years. And a Beatle year, probably more when they became famous rather than the early days. It was like about 5 years of everyone else's life, just because the bombardment of stimulation.
Oh, so much happening.
Yeah. Okay, so the date, we're going to say possibly spring 96. Obviously very difficult to pin down.
Yeah, these things are. Again, they should have been taking notes.
Yeah.
They should have known that all these years later, you and I would be sat with Jacaranda debating this.
Yeah.
Selfish.
It's only 59 years later. What's wrong with them? The other thing is the personnel, because Cayenne is always supposed to be a Paul song.
Yeah.
And really, Cayenne is just a 12-bar with someone going da 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 da. So if that's not George, then what makes it a Paul song? Which means that must be Paul. Plus, these horrible 12-bar blues that I was telling you about. The guitar sounds very similar to Cayenne.
Yeah.
So could that have been Paul playing lead?
It could have been, because you think of how well progressed George's guitar was. You're listening into In Spite of All the Danger.
Yeah, that would be the day. It's good.
It's good little guitar work there.
Yeah.
And that's 58.
Yeah.
So George is already well advanced.
I got this funny feeling it could be Paul.
Yeah. I'd agree with you, because I think there's something about a George Harrison solo.
Even in those days.
Yeah. I think you can sort of just tell the way he does it. I think Paul is a different sound, so yeah, that wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. And Mark Lewison thinks that there was probably 2 recordings. But, I mean, there's obviously quite a bit of an improvement.
Yeah.
Hallelujah, I Love Her So sounds pretty good to me.
It does. I think they do that really well.
Yeah. One After 909, and we were talking earlier about whether they'd recorded that in Percy Phillips. You imagine it would probably sound pretty similar to them. So
exactly.
Maybe that's not such a big loss.
And I still think that is a really good rock and roll song.
Yeah. Oh no, I mean On the Rooftop, it's fantastic.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
Yeah. George's work on the rooftop.
Yeah.
Fabulous.
And his fingers must have been frozen.
Yeah, of course.
How do you still do that? But class guitarist, wasn't he? That's just it. Brilliant.
Actually, for the listeners, I recommend a YouTube, and to you, David, YouTube channel called Ably House, ABLY House.
Yeah.
They reproduce Beatles songs.
Okay.
And they do they're all very good musicians. They have like a split screen. You can see them all playing the parts. And I think it's one guy does the guitar, harmonica and keyboards.
Okay.
Very talented.
Yeah.
They got a fellow who looks a bit like Paul playing bass. and then the drums. So you've got like a split screen and you can see all the parts.
Oh,
They do
cool.
a fantastic job. Yeah.
Oh,
Abley House.
I'll look that one up. Brilliant.
Yeah, I'll send you. I'll
Oh,
write
yeah.
that one down at the end.
Yeah, definitely.
Amazing stuff.
Like it.
The other thing I wanted to kind of discuss / debate with you is Stu's bass playing.
Yes,
All right.
happy to.
Now I'm going to make the case against him. If you listen to Cayenne, it's a 12-bar blues,
Yep.
and he's not hitting even the root notes at
Yep.
the right time.
Yep.
All right. So we'd probably agree, like anyone, when you start, you're not that good. But
Exactly.
what's the evidence that he got good or that he was decent? And do you think he got decent?
Well, he did, and as you know, playing bass guitar, if you're playing rock and roll or country or skiffle, and we had this discussion before, 3 or 4 chords and you're there. So if you're doing a Chuck Berry song,
Yeah.
and they're all the same, aren't they, really?
Yeah.
So any Chuck Berry song.
Yeah.
And if you're playing in A, right, you don't actually need to use your left hand, because you start on the A string, and then go up to D,
Go to the
then
D,
go back down
go
to the
back
A.
to the E,
and
yeah,
so
absolutely.
you don't need to use your left hand.
Yeah.
So to be a rock and roll bass player, as long as you can keep time, you're okay. Now the evidence that I was looking for is one from interviewing Pete Best, and of course, as we know in any band, the rhythm section is the drums working with the bass.
Yeah.
If Stu wasn't doing that right, Pete wouldn't be doing that, and we know how regular Pete would keep a beat. So Pete has said what a good bass player he was. Secondly, Klaus Foreman, who became a fantastic bass player because of Stuart.
Right.
And he says he wants to play like Stuart could play. He loved the way Stuart played bass. So that one's good for me.
Yeah.
Next one, Howie Casey. He was with Derry and the Seniors, first Mersey group out in Hamburg. While they were playing at the Kaiser Keller, Chapman had decided to split the groups up a bit. So Stuart went and joined a group with Howie Casey. So Howie Casey played with him in the band, and he says Stuart was a very good rock and roll bass player. Now, if he couldn't play it, was playing with his back to the audience and not plugged in, that would not have happened.
Yeah.
So you've got 3 people who played with him who could tell you he was a good rock and roll bass player. Now, depending on how good you are and whether you can go further than that, well, people say, yes, but listen to Paul in 1968 or something like that. And this is always my argument with any of these Beatles things is, in that year, at that time, who was doing what? At that time, by the time you're getting into 60 and going into 61, Stu had been playing a long time. All those hours in Hamburg. Now, if he was good enough, not just to play with them, but also to play with another band put together with Howie Casey, and then after he quit the Beatles, early 62, he played with a German band called the Bats. If you can't play bass, that doesn't happen. So that for me is enough evidence to say he was a good rock and roll bass player. Now, you don't have to be the greatest in the world to play all the songs they were playing then, but there's enough variety in there. You have to be able to do that. And any musician, if you're playing hundreds of hours, and you'll know this, you can tell pretty quickly if somebody can or can't make the grade. It's the same with a drummer. I've played with so many drummers over the years. You know pretty quickly what level the drummer's at. Well, it's the same with any instrument in the group.
Yeah, but I mean, those two really have to. I mean, obviously, a bad guitarist is not going to help the band, but those two.
You've got to have the rhythm going.
It's pretty vital.
Yeah.
Let's be honest. Yeah.
If that hadn't have worked, I don't go along with the theory of, well, John just tolerated him. Not for hundreds and hundreds of hours, and not for all these other people to have said Stu was a good rock and roll bass player.
I suppose they would have been playing Till There Was You or something like that. I mean, that's got loads of chords.
Yeah.
That's a very difficult song.
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose if you're playing the root notes. Yeah, I mean, he may not have done too much beyond root notes.
But who did?
Maybe, yeah, exactly.
Back then, who did?
When you got that do-do-do-do-do-do-do-do, when you've got that nailed, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
As you said, you know, you've got this big palette.
Yeah.
All right, that's fine. Pete Best. All right.
Yeah.
Right, strap yourselves in, everybody, for the big debate. So there's obviously a lot of quote-unquote revisionism that goes on in different places. One thing, when I listened to you talking to Robert Rodriguez, the myth about the Camford taking away his bass drum.
Yeah.
Just explain that. Because Camford didn't do rock and roll. That's
No, he didn't. That's it. And this is the lengths to which I go to my research. Okay. I got the 100 song set of Burt Camford's songs, right, and listened to them all. Trust me, that is painful. Okay, for someone who's a rock and roll fan.
What kind of stuff was it?
It's what they call in Germany. They call Schlager music. It's light entertainment. You may remember James Last and his orchestra, big band. So you'd have drums, but it would be more accent on the snare and the cymbals, a little bit of bass to keep everything in time. But it's not a dominant instrument, because your main thing is it's your melody and all the other instruments going on, like an orchestra.
Would you have double bass?
Quite possibly, yeah. Yeah, you'd have a variety of all these kind of things.
Right.
But you would have a big orchestra playing these songs. So Camphor, doing what he did with Sheridan and the Beatles, that's why he picked an old Scottish folk song, like on it, and When the Saints Go Marching In, because they were of that ilk. That would be known enough in Germany, but it was not Little Richard and Chuck Berry. It was not rock and roll. So at that time, so in June '61, the Beatles have now developed this very hard rock and roll sound. Pete's developed what they call the atom beat, because they had to match shout. They had to get the punters off the Grosse Freiheit into the clubs. So when you see the auditorium where they recorded, and I went there a couple of years ago, it's like a big school gymnasium with a stage and curtains. So they're on the stage. If you want to record a Scottish folk song with a bit of a funky rhythm like Sheridan did, you do not want a thumping rock and roll bass drum, because you're recording it live. There's no baffles, there's nothing to separate the sound. So you'd want it to be quiet. And so Campbell said to Pete, all I want is your snare stuff and a cymbal. Now the rumour about taking the ones that I think came from Tony Sheridan.
Because him and Pete Best, they had a fight. They didn't like each other, right?
Yeah. So when you're examining evidence for eyewitnesses, you think, okay, why is he the only one who's told this story? Is there history? Now, there weren't many musicians that Sheridan rated anyway, and he was a nightmare to play with. So it's just an anecdote from Sheridan with no evidence to back it up. Nobody else ever mentioned it. Now we know that there's one of the engineers had said, well, they were loud, which they would have been with Pete playing the full kit, which is no good to Bert Camford. So you think, okay, is there any more evidence? Nobody else has ever suggested that drums were taken away. Pete says the drums weren't taken away. I was just asked to play. We think, well, that fits in with the style of music that Camford was doing. So, fair enough. I'm happy enough with that. I don't have a problem of trying to prove, and some people have a very anti-Pete Best agenda, just to try and throw digs his way. There's no justification for that. And Sheridan also said, well, they had to take him away because Pete couldn't keep time. So you think, okay, if this was a session that wasn't recorded, we've got no evidence, but we've got the record. So with my latest book, Finding The Fourth Beatle, I went to drums, and I've picked 3 drummers.
I was just going to say that you got some drummers in.
I thought there's no point me, as an author who doesn't play drums, giving my opinion on the drummer, because I'm not qualified. I know a good drummer from a bad drummer because I've played with both, but I can't technically analyse it. So we picked these 3 drummers, different ages, none of whom had listened to the My Bonnie session or the Decca audition. And I said, listen to that, you tell me, was Pete Best in time? And I said, absolutely brilliant. The speed he does,
the roll at the beginning,
and all the way through. So that then puts the eyewitness accounts who say he couldn't keep time. I think, well, you're talking nonsense, because it's recorded. We've got the evidence, and he kept time, and he played very, very well.
Was it true, the stuff that he wouldn't hang out with them and he was somewhat apart from the rest of the band?
That seems to have come from a great number of people, in which case you say, well, that sounds more likely. And I think there was always this thing, and in a way that almost the focus of the Finding the Fourth Beatle book was, why was Ringo the drummer who stayed? Why was he the one who lasted?
Well, let me just say one thing. People won't know that they asked 3 people before Ringo. Because there's this kind of idea that, as you said, in the 8 days a week, and I mean, we were talking off air, Paul repeats these stories.
Yeah.
I mean, fair enough, he may have misremembered it, or it may just roll off the tongue, these kind of formulaic kind of stories. And there's a story that, the first time they played with him, it felt right. And you said that it was actually Pete suggested that Ringo
Yeah,
when he was ill. Is that right?
Yeah. The first time Ringo sat in at the end of '61, it wasn't because they thought, "Oh, let's go and get Ringo, Sir Ringo the Great."
Yeah.
It was because Pete who was mates, because they were all mates out in Hamburg. Pete said, "I can't do it. Ringo, do us a favour, will you sit in?" Now, Paul's quote of the first time he did it, it was great. Which time is that he's referring to? First time he sat in, end of '61. When he sat in the spring of '62. The first time at Hume Hall when he's a Fab Four drummer. First time at the Cavern. And this is one of my problems, and revisionism is a good word. I have this phrase I use, which is, it's the cuddly Disney version of Beatles history.
Yeah.
And it's the history they would like you to know.
Yeah. But to defend him, that's what the mainstream wants, you see.
Exactly.
They don't want complication.
No.
You know? TV, mainstream TV, they want something easy. So
nice and easy.
To kind of defend him a little bit, you know?
Yeah. And where we go with the book is, as you say, 3 other drummers were asked. It was never a case of it was always going to be Ringo. There's no evidence to support that. There's no evidence of John and Paul having much of a rapport with Ringo at all beforehand. George was the one in spring '62. They seemed to get on well together. So other drummers were asked, but Ringo said yes. And my conclusion is, I don't care who else was asked. For history, I want to know. But Ringo was the one who said yes. And all the way through Beatles history, the right person is in the group at the right time.
Yeah.
He was the right person. He was the perfect one to break in to that little triumvirate of John, Paul and George, who, don't forget, have been together since the end of '57.
Yes. Yeah, we ascertained that, didn't we? George joined in '57.
George in the end of '57.
Yeah.
So they were together for all these years, breaking into those 3. Ringo's the only one who ever properly did it. He got in there, he got on their wavelength.
But then if they didn't have a rapport, then that would mean it was almost a bit of an accident that he fitted in, or not?
I think so.
Yeah.
Because, again, we go back to what I was saying before of, when you're analysing something in Beatles history, you can only go on what was known at that time. Forget that we know Ringo just became invaluable to the group. It could not have worked with any other drummer. I cannot see it work with anybody else.
Yeah.
He was the right one. But they didn't know that in August '62. And we know that Ringo was introduced to Brian on the Saturday. Brian said, I'll call him on the Tuesday. Brian called him Tuesday night. Had the meet with Pete on the Wednesday. Ringo joined Saturday. It happened in 1 week. That's according to Ringo.
Very interesting.
So I found an interview he did in November 1962, before they were famous, before the Disney version, revisionism. He said, this is how it happened. So forget all the rewrites and stuff. That is the evidence. It all happened in a week.
Presumably they saw something in him, because he was the most advanced of them as a professional musician, would you say?
Exactly, and
Yeah.
I think it's one of the key things when we look back at Ringo's career, and the first group he's in, the Eddie Clayton Skiffle group, they win awards. They won the top skiffle groups in Liverpool. He then plays with the Darktown Skiffle group, who were one of the best in Liverpool.
He was always that much further ahead than the other 3, wasn't he?
He's in Rory Stone and the Hurricanes,
Yeah.
who were the top group in Liverpool, until they're overtaken by the Beatles, the group that he joins. That's more than a coincidence. Ringo always just happens to be in the best group. You don't do that by accident.
Maybe the eccentricity as well. I mean, that's eccentric style. Maybe that appealed to him as well, I think.
His natural thing of being left-handed playing the right-handed kit, that gives you a unique style for a start.
Yeah.
And that was the fun of talking to all these different drummers, saying, explain to me why Ringo does what he does, as well as interviews that Ringo's given. And you work out the instinct he had, which is a natural ability. Again, we were talking before about my lazy excuse for never learning to read right music. It's because John and Paul couldn't. But they had this natural ability with music. Ringo had the equivalent on drums. He just knew, because of the experience he built up of jazz, skiffle, country, R&B, rock and roll, everything. When a song was being developed, they needed a certain style.
Yeah.
He could think, oh, now, we used to do that in Rory Stone and the Hurricanes. I can do a version of that. He had so much more experience to draw on, which made him, a great drummer and perfect. But they did not know that when he joined.
Maybe there was some intuition of, I don't know.
Well, I think because he'd sat in for Pete a few times in '62, that gave them an idea of what he could do. So I think when it came to it and they had to make their choice, they thought, well, Ringo knows the top drummer. When we played with him, it worked. He'll do it. He's professional, he's experienced, he'll be ideal. We get on well with him, he's funny. It's a little bit of a gamble, but I think they pretty knew well what they were getting. And as we know, it worked. He was perfect and nobody else could have done that.
How sort of contrived do you think their image? I mean, obviously Brian put them in the suits, etc., cleaned them up. Mm-hmm. But between, they talked about they used to have this sort of language they used with each other. And with the press conferences, there's all these asides. Mm-hmm. They're sort of almost like they're talking a little bit of the language.
Yep.
How contrived do you think that was? Do you think they would have taken their personalities and thought, well, Ringo can be the sad sort of thoughtful one and John's the sarcastic one?
Yeah. That was just them. That was them, naturally.
So there you have it, part 1 of my talk with David Bedford. I'll get the other part online pretty quickly because I'm between jobs, about to start a new chapter in my life, which I'll tell you more about later. Yeah, I should have the other part within a week, I would say. Probably next Saturday or maybe Friday, because Friday was originally the day I was putting these podcasts out, and nice to get some kind of routine going. So in the second part of the talk, obviously I'll talk about it in the intro then. But we carry on with this Ringo and Pete Best thing. It's quite revealing, some of the stuff David says. And then we talk about a few other things. Do what, in fact, Ken McNabb and I did, which is try and put a finger on what exactly the appeal of the Beatles is beyond music. And it's not, we don't talk about the long hair or the trousers for Ruttles fans. It seems like you can just discuss this stuff endlessly without reaching a definitive answer, but it's all good fun. So yeah, here comes the music. So I'll see you in about a week or so. Got lots of other stuff lined up for the podcast. I've asked lots of people, might have some returning guests, Mr. McNabb, for example. And so we'll see how that goes. So thanks for listening, and see you again soon. Bye.